Distinguished Representative. And now the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Javier Milei, President of the Argentine Republic. I request that protocol accompany His Excellency and I invite him to address the Assembly. To the authorities of the United Nations, to the representatives of the member countries, and to all the citizens of the world who are following this closely, this summit, good morning. Last year, I stood before you in this very assembly and presented a new direction in Argentina's foreign policy. We argued that it was imperative to return to the ideas of liberty, to the immortal principles that uphold the dignity of life, liberty, and property for all individuals under the law, and the need for international cooperation to have precisely the purpose of ensuring them. However, I warned that the UN had strayed from its course in recent decades. The successful United Nations model, which spoke of the need for peace without victory and was based on the cooperation of nation-states, was replaced by a model of supranational government run by international bureaucrats who seek to impose a specific way of life on the citizens of the world. This is how we went from an organization that aimed to mediate peace among equals to one that seeks to decide not only what each nation must do, but also what each individual in the different parts of the world must do. We believe in the original purpose of this organization. We believe that there are global problems that require dialogue and international cooperation to be solved. But for that, we must reject these overreaches which often accompany noble agendas. As we stated last year, we will never support the curtailment of individual or commercial freedoms, nor the violation of the natural rights of the citizens of member states. And over the past year and a half, we have voted accordingly. I say this knowing that many do not share my words, because, as I have always said, it is better to speak an uncomfortable truth than a comfortable lie. Along these lines, today I want to talk to you about a specific problem faced by all modern countries. Currently, all over the world, a contradiction is being posed between the present and the future, a problem of a political, economic, and philosophical nature upon whose answer the fate of humanity depends. Entire. If we put it in terms of comfort and discomfort, as I have described, the whole world seems to be stuck in the comfort of the present, ignoring the consequences that this may bring in the future. Since discomfort takes away votes and power from those who embrace it, leaders prefer to do everything in their power to maintain the inherited status quo, even if it comes at the expense of future consequences. They burn the future to keep the present warm. In this way, contemporary states have entered a dynamic that is very difficult to reverse, in which the incentives for both the population and politicians are geared toward prioritizing the distribution of today's wealth over generating tomorrow's wealth. At every moment, decision makers are faced with the choice of either preserving the legacy entrusted to them or destroying it. This legacy can be accumulated wealth, productive capacity, laws, or anything that serves the common good. Generally, if they burn through their legacy, if they choose comfort, they will enjoy great immediate benefits, but will suffer even greater costs in the future. If I use up my savings today, I lose them for tomorrow. If, on the other hand, they preserve it, they maintain growth and prosperity both for themselves and for future generations. That is to say, it is necessary to find a balance so that today's bread does not mean hunger tomorrow. And in this way, we can ensure a sustained increase in well-being. This is what economists call economic growth. Such growth may sometimes feel slow, and at times it may have stalled momentarily because progress is never linear. But it is precisely its long-term consistency that has systematically revolutionized the world and lifted billions out of poverty. The difference between zero growth and 2% growth in the long run is the difference between stagnation and prosperity. We Argentines know a lot about this, being the only country in the region that hasn't grown in the last 15 years. On the legal front, the condition for growth is the sanctity of property and the free market, which is nothing more than free cooperation between equals. Because without property rights, there is no saving, and without saving, there is no ability to exchange freely. There is no investment, and without investment, growth is impossible. But it is not in the individual interest of the politician to respect these principles, because it is precisely in the expansion of the state at the expense of citizens' freedoms where the politician gains power. Thus, for the politician, it will always be profitable to sacrifice the future on the altar of the present, because consuming accumulated capital creates momentary well-being, and that momentary well-being generates votes. But in exchange, they are sacrificing a future of greater growth. This causes the accumulated wealth to become less and less over time. The greatest manifestation of this is in those countries that display an orgy of increased public spending, since the state does not create wealth but rather steals it or even destroys it. In this scheme, the politician gains power in two ways. They gain democratic legitimacy and obtain more resources to spend. In other words, the politician has a double incentive to promote this intergenerational betrayal. Because even though everyone loses in the future, in the present, he gains more than anyone else. And in this sense, if a great man is one who plants trees whose shade he knows he will never enjoy, then the one who cuts down the trees others planted just to build his seat of power is a miserable man. In short, he is a despicable man. This is the great evil and the great trap to which almost all nations are slowly succumbing. Because when this process is carried out, growth stagnates. And when growth stagnates, the demand for redistribution intensifies. Then the populist politician shouts even louder, appealing to envy and resentment. The end result of this process is seeing helpless young people suffocated by the weight of a state they know is only there to exploit them. Unfortunately, fiscal expansion measures, monetary expansion, and the expansion of state power over that of individuals make up a pattern that is repeating itself in all countries, especially in those that make up the free world. But the problem is not just about economic policy. We also see it when equality before the law is violated or when the doors are opened indiscriminately to immigration for political reasons. Contrary to what immigration is, in this case it would be an invasion, and the international cooperation organizations which this organization is a part of are also not immune to this problem. Over the years, this organization has taken on functions that are unrelated to its founding spirit. It has created layer upon layer of bodies, agencies, and programs, resulting in a hypertrophy of administrations that are not very effective when it comes to solving the problems for which they were created. Thus, the responsibilities of the UN have increased, the contributions received from member nations have grown, and the tangible results that this organization had to offer the world have diminished. To this cocktail of conflicting incentives, we must add that, unlike national leaders, international organizations, no one is truly held accountable for failing to solve a problem. This contradiction between lofty goals and meager results has led to an erosion of the prestige of this institution and others. To give a clear example, the poor results of the 2030 agenda bear witness to what I am describing. What persists in practice is a cycle of recycled structures, multiplied resources, and rescheduled goals. For this reason, Argentina decided at the time to withdraw from this process because we saw in this agenda a waste of resources, scarce resources for purposes we did not share, and with the effect of distracting attention from the real difficulties of a world heading towards stagnation. It is my duty to warn against this problem, because in Argentina we have experienced its consequences to the fullest, natural consequences. We have reached the end of the comfortable path that comes from ignoring the future. In other words, we come from a future that for you has not yet fully arrived. And I want to tell you that you still have time to avoid it, because no society can survive if it burns the future to warm the present. In my country, we have learned a very valuable lesson the hard way. For decades, future flows were mortgaged in order to distribute existing assets in the present. In 2023, we finally reached a long term of 100 consecutive years of doing things badly, of passing the bill from hand to hand until there was no one left to pay it. And all of that, added to what I told you before, ended up bankrupting our state. As a result of that implosion over the past year and a half, we have faced the enormous task of managing extreme scarcity. And today, for the first time in decades, we are doing what needs to be done so that the future will be better. For this, the only solution is to do the opposite of what was done in the past. In contrast, the rest of the political establishment demands that we do the same things they did, which also dragged us into decline, mortgaging the future to satisfy present demands. They want us to apply what they did 1,000 times, which brought us to where we are now. But I want to make it clear to you that today, Argentina has a government that has decided to take the right path, even if it is the most difficult one. Because the prosperity and progress of our people can no longer be postponed. We are not, however, the only ones making the tough decisions that this historic moment demands. President Trump in the United States also understands that it is time to reverse a dynamic that was leading the United States toward catastrophe. And we know that a catastrophe in the United States is a global catastrophe. His firm and successful policy in terms of putting a stop to illegal immigration makes this more than clear. He understands that he must do what is necessary even if many people don't like it before it is too late. In other countries, for example, it is already too late for this decision. Not only that, but he is also carrying out an unprecedented restructuring of the terms of international trade, a task of titanic proportions that strikes at the very heart of the global economic system, because this system was ravaging the industrial core of his country and plunging it into an unparalleled debt crisis. Moreover, he is carrying out a purge of the institutional capture of the American state because left-wing factions had infiltrated it, undermining any reform program, no matter how necessary it was. This type of challenge, which both President Trump and I are addressing, has a common denominator that all countries in the world and even supranational organizations must face. They must find a way to rekindle an interest in the future and not succumb to the temptation of only addressing the present. This is something that the great Western nations practiced for a long time, and we need to recover it. We need to return to the basics. We must regain a sense of what is truly important, along with the willingness to choose what is difficult and right over what is easy and comfortable. As I mentioned earlier, this is also true for the various international organizations that have gradually incorporated this approach into their ecosystem. I believe I speak for everyone when I say that we would like the UN to lead this paradigm shift, returning to the foundations that made it the great organization it once was in the past. That is why I would like to humbly offer this assembly 4 principles that we believe could be useful in pursuing this goal. First, the principle of essential mandate. The central mission of the UN is to preserve peace and international security. Everything else must be conceived as complementary to that end. The strategic management of this institution's resources therefore requires adhering to those priorities, not others. 2. Principle of international subsidiarity. The UN should intervene on an issue only when it is evident that the problem demonstrably exceeds the capacities of national action. In all other cases, the initiative should be returned to the states, who possess democratic legitimacy and are accountable to their people. 3. Principle of institutional efficiency. Just as Argentina has begun a process of optimizing the state, eliminating redundant structures, and returning resources to taxpayers, we believe that the UN needs a similar path. This involves conducting reliable audits, closing ineffective programs, consolidating agencies into single entities, and providing funding conditional on verifiable results. 4. Principle of simplification and regulatory rationalization. Peace is not just the absence of conflict. It requires prosperous societies. International cooperation should not become an obstacle to economic growth and the creation of opportunities. Therefore, we should only support initiatives that do not restrict the ability of states to unleash their productive forces, attract investment, and promote trade, which are the most successful ways to reduce poverty. We believe that these four principles would be great values to redirect this organization so that it can endure and deliver tangible results over time. To conclude, I want to highlight four sensitive issues of vital importance to the Argentine Republic. First of all, I want to reiterate our legitimate and unwavering claim to sovereignty over the Malvinas Islands, South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, and the surrounding maritime areas that remain occupied, illegally occupied. Despite the 80 years that have passed since the creation of this organization, colonial situations like this one remain unresolved. Therefore, we invite the United Kingdom to resume bilateral negotiations in accordance with Resolution 2065 of this very General Assembly, along with all subsequent resolutions that accompany it. Secondly, I want to once again express my condemnation of the fundamentalist violence that still exists and spreads throughout the world. In Argentina, we have already suffered this horror with the attacks on the Israeli embassy and the EMIA in 1992 and 1994, respectively. That is why we urge the international community to strengthen legal cooperation to ensure that Interpol red notices are respected and that those responsible for these atrocities can be brought to justice, helping us to finally heal this painful wound in the history of our country. Third, we are witnessing an unacceptable escalation of political violence by the left on a global scale, a kind of violence that we in Argentina know all too well. It is unacceptable to resort to force where reason fails. That is why we emphatically condemn these actions that violate the basic norms of democratic coexistence. Fourth, the situation of Argentine citizen Nahuel Galo, who has been arbitrarily kidnapped and detained in Venezuela without charges, without legal or consular assistance. In simple terms, a forced disappearance. We demand the immediate release of Nahuel Galo from the Venezuelan government and call on the international community to support this legitimate demand in defense of the most basic principles of international law and human dignity. Finally, we reiterate our demand for the immediate release of the hostages who remain captive in Gaza. Finally, may God bless the free world. May the forces of heaven be with us. Thank you all very much.